The woman with auburn hair stood in the abandoned stable behind the old boarding house, her hand moving in slow, gentle strokes along the flank of a horse that looked like it had forgotten what kindness felt like. Morgan Kelly had arrived in Riverton, Wyoming just 3 days ago with nothing but a worn carpet bag and enough money to last her maybe 2 weeks if she was careful. The year was 1882, and the town sat nestled along the Wind River, a place where cowboys and ranchers came to trade cattle and stories. She had fled St. Louis after her stepfather tried to marry her off to a man 3 times her age, a wealthy merchant who collected young wives like some men collected pocket watches. At 22 years old, Morgan had decided she would rather face the uncertainty of the frontier than a lifetime trapped in that gilded cage. The boarding house where she had taken a small room overlooked a series of weathered structures, including this stable that seemed to have been forgotten by time itself. She had noticed the horse yesterday, a magnificent black stallion with a coat that should have gleamed but instead hung dull and matted. No one seemed to tend to him. No one seemed to care. So this morning, after the sun had climbed high enough to warm the September air, she had taken it upon herself to do something about it. She found an old brush hanging on a rusted nail and approached the animal with the same calm determination that had gotten her this far from home. The horse had startled at first, backing into the corner of his stall, but Morgan had simply stood there, speaking in low, soothing tones until his breathing steadied. "You are not forgotten," she whispered now, working through a particularly stubborn tangle in his mane. "Someone sees you." "I see you." The stallion's ears flicked back and forth, listening. His dark eyes, which had held nothing but wariness when she first approached, now watched her with something that might have been curiosity. She had been at this for nearly an hour, and though there was still so much work to do, she could already see the difference. Patches of his coat were beginning to show their true luster. "Easy now," she murmured when he shifted his weight. "I know it has been a long time since anyone cared enough to do this properly, but we are going to make you feel better, you and I." She did not hear the footsteps behind her, did not sense another presence until a voice, rough as gravel and touched with something between shock and disbelief, cut through the quiet stable air. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" Morgan spun around, the brush still in her hand, and found herself face to face with a man who looked like he had ridden straight out of a penny dreadful. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that strained against a faded blue work shirt. Dark stubble covered a strong jaw, and beneath the brim of his hat, she could see eyes the color of storm clouds, currently narrowed in a mixture of concern and something else she could not quite identify. "I am brushing this horse," she said, recovering her composure and lifting her chin. Something that clearly should have been done weeks ago. The man stepped closer, moving with a cautious gait that suggested old injuries or long days in the saddle. She noticed he favored his left leg slightly. "You need to step away from him, right now." "I most certainly will not," Morgan replied, turning back to the horse and resuming her gentle strokes. "He is filthy and neglected, and he clearly needs someone to care for him." "Lady, you do not understand." The man's voice carried an urgency now. "That is Shadow. He has not let anyone touch him in over 8 months. Not since." He trailed off, and she heard him take a breath. "He will hurt you. He kicked the stable hand so hard last spring the man could not walk for a month." Morgan paused in her brushing but did not step away. Instead, she looked back at the man with steady green eyes. "Well, he is letting me touch him now." For a long moment, the cowboy just stared at her, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally something that looked almost like pain. He removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that hung a bit too long, as if he had been putting off a visit to the barber. That is not possible. And yet here we are, Morgan said softly. She turned fully to face him, keeping one hand resting lightly on Shadow's neck. The horse had not moved away from her touch. You are his owner, I presume, Augustus Dalton, he said, the name coming out rough. And yes, he is mine, or he was. I have not been able to get near him since my brother died. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with grief that had not yet found a proper place to settle. Morgan felt her heart squeeze with unexpected sympathy. I am sorry for your loss. Augustus looked away, jaw working as he struggled with something internal. Thomas was the one who had a way with horses. Shadow was his, really. I bought him for Thomas's 21st birthday just 2 years ago. They were inseparable. Then there was an accident during a roundup last winter. Thomas got caught in a stampede. He stopped, cleared his throat. Shadow saw it happen. He has not been the same since, neither have I. Morgan absorbed this information, understanding dawning. So you left him here, alone. I could not bear to look at him, Augustus admitted, and the raw honesty in his voice struck her. Every time I tried to approach him, he would go wild, like he blamed me for not saving Thomas. And maybe he should. God knows I blame myself. That is a heavy burden to carry, Morgan said quietly. She studied the man before her, seeing past the rough exterior to the grief that had carved lines around his eyes and mouth. But I do not think Shadow blames anyone. I think he is grieving too, and no one understood that he needed comfort just as much as any person would. Augustus finally looked at her directly, really seeing her for the first time. He noticed the determined set of her jaw, the compassion in her eyes, the way her hair had come loose from its pins and hung in waves around her face. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was genuine in a way that seemed rare, especially out here where most people guarded themselves like treasure. Who are you? He asked. Morgan Kelly. I arrived in Riverton a few days ago. I am staying at the boarding house. She did not offer more than that, and he did not press. Instead, Augustus took a cautious step closer to the stall. Shadow's ears pinned back immediately and his nostrils flared. Augustus stopped. I have tried everything. Different trainers, different approaches. He nearly trampled the last man who tried to work with him. Maybe he just needed someone who was not trying to fix him, Morgan suggested. Someone who simply wanted to help him feel cared for again. Augustus watched as she turned back to the horse and continued her gentle ministrations. Shadow's ears gradually shifted forward again, his posture relaxing. It was the most incredible thing Augustus had witnessed in months, this small miracle happening in a forgotten stable behind a boarding house he passed every day. How are you doing that? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. Morgan smiled slightly. I am not doing anything special. I am just being present with him. Sometimes that is all another soul needs, whether they have 2 legs or 4. Something in Augustus's chest, something that had been clenched tight since the day he watched them lower his younger brother into the ground, began to loosen just a fraction. He found himself stepping closer, drawn by a force he could not name. Can I? He hesitated. Can I try? Morgan met his eyes and saw the vulnerability there, the desperate hope of a man who had lost too much and was terrified of losing more. She nodded. Move slowly. Let him see you coming. And for heaven's sake, breathe. He can sense your tension. Augustus inhaled deeply, consciously relaxing his shoulders. He approached the stall with more care than he had shown anything in the past 8 months. Shadow's eyes tracked him, and for a moment, Augustus was certain the horse would rear up, would reject him the way he had every other time. But Morgan stepped slightly to the side, keeping her hand on Shadow's neck, and said something so soft Augustus could not make out the words. The horse remained still. Put your hand here, Morgan instructed, guiding Augustus's calloused palm to rest just below where her own hand lay. "Let him remember you. Let him know you are still here." Augustus's hand shook slightly as it made contact with Shadow's coat. The horse tensed but did not pull away. Beneath his palm, Augustus could feel the animal's rapid heartbeat gradually beginning to slow. "Thomas loved you," Augustus said, his voice thick with emotion he had not allowed himself to feel in far too long. "I know he did. And I am sorry I left you alone. I was hurting too badly to see that you needed me." Morgan watched this man, this cowboy who clearly carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, and felt something shift in her own chest. She had come to Riverton to escape, to find some kind of fresh start in a place where no one knew her history. She had not expected to stumble into someone else's grief and find it resonating with her own losses. "He remembers you," she said softly. "Look at his ears. He is listening." Augustus raised his eyes from where his hand rested on Shadow's neck and found himself looking directly at Morgan instead. This close, he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes, could smell the faint scent of lavender that clung to her despite the dust and horse hair. "Thank you," he said. "I do not even know why you did this, but thank you." "Because no living thing should be abandoned," Morgan replied simply, "no matter how much pain surrounds them." There was a story behind those words, Augustus realized. Some hurt that had driven this woman across however many miles to end up in a small Wyoming town with nothing but determination and compassion to her name. He wanted to know that story. The realization surprised him. "Will you help me?" The question left his mouth before he had fully formed it in his mind. "With Shadow, I mean. Will you help me reach him again?" Morgan considered the request, considered the man making it. Augustus Dalton stood before her raw and honest in his need, and something about that honesty called to her. In St. Louis, every interaction had been coated in layers of social niceties and hidden agendas. Here, in this dusty stable with a grieving horse and a grieving man, everything felt startlingly real. "Yes," she said, "I will help you." The relief that washed over Augustus's face was so profound it nearly broke her heart. "I have a ranch about 5 miles outside town, the Shadow Creek Ranch. Thomas and I built it up from nothing over the past 4 years. I have been keeping Shadow here because I could not bring him home, could not stand having him there as a reminder. But if you think we can help him, really help him, then maybe it is time." "I think," Morgan said carefully, "that healing is possible for all of us if we are willing to do the work." Augustus nodded slowly. "I need to warn you, the ranch is not much to look at right now. I have been letting things slide since Thomas died. The hands do what they can, but I have not been much of a foreman lately." "I am not looking for polished silver," Morgan assured him. "I am looking for honest work and a place where I can be useful. I think we might be able to help each other." The words hung between them, laden with possibility and the first fragile threads of connection. Augustus found himself studying this woman who had appeared in his life like some kind of answer to a prayer he had not known how to speak. "Where did you come from, Morgan Kelly?" "Somewhere I could not stay," she answered, and he respected her enough not to push further. "All right then," Augustus said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. "The ranch always needs good hands, and if you have a way with horses, I can offer you a job. Room and board included, plus wages. We can work with Shadow together and maybe—" He paused, uncertain how to voice what he was feeling. "Maybe some good can come from all this loss." Morgan withdrew her hand from Shadow's neck and extended it toward Augustus instead. "You have a deal, Mr. Dalton." He took her hand, noting the strength in her grip despite her slender fingers. "Augustus, please, Mr. Dalton was my father. Augustus then, and you should call me Morgan." They stood there in the stable, hands clasped, while Shadow watched them with dark, intelligent eyes. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment would become the foundation of something neither had been looking for but both desperately needed. "Can you be ready to leave tomorrow morning?" Augustus asked. "I will arrange for Shadow to be transported. It will be easier once we get him to the ranch where there is more space and fewer people." "I can be ready," Morgan confirmed. She had so little to pack it would take her all of 10 minutes. Augustus released her hand, though part of him was reluctant to break the contact. "I will pick you up at the boarding house at dawn. Bring warm clothes. September nights can get cold, and the ranch house is not exactly a palace." "I am not afraid of hard work or simple living," Morgan said. "That is part of why I came west." After Augustus left, Morgan remained with Shadow for another hour, talking to him in low tones, continuing the patient work of restoring some measure of trust and care. The horse leaned into her touch eventually, a small gift that felt enormous. That night, lying in her narrow bed at the boarding house, Morgan thought about the choice she had just made. She knew nothing about ranching, knew very little about horses beyond what she had learned from books and the few riding lessons her mother had arranged before she died. But she knew about loss and loneliness, and the desperate need to be seen as something more than what others expected. Augustus Dalton had looked at her today and seen someone capable, someone who could help, not someone to be bartered and sold like property. That alone was worth the risk. Dawn came cold and clear, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of pink and gold. Morgan was waiting outside the boarding house with her single bag when Augustus arrived driving a weathered wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. He climbed down to help her with her belongings, his hand steadying her elbow as she climbed up onto the seat. "Shadow is being brought out by one of my ranch hands," Augustus explained as he guided the horses down the main street and out toward open country. "Jake is one of the few people Shadow tolerates at a distance. He will follow behind us." The ride gave them time to talk, to fill in some of the spaces between them. Augustus told her about how he and Thomas had come to Wyoming after their parents died of fever in Kansas. They had been 21 and 19, full of dreams about building something lasting. The ranch had been their shared vision, every fence post and barn beam a testament to what they could accomplish together. Thomas was the optimist, Augustus said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He always saw the best in people, believed things would work out. I was the practical one, the one who worried about money and weather and all the things that could go wrong. His jaw tightened. "Turns out I was right to worry. You could not have prevented what happened," Morgan said gently. "Maybe not. But I should have been faster, should have seen the stampede coming sooner. He was my little brother. Protecting him was my job." Morgan understood that guilt, the way it could wrap around your heart and squeeze until you could barely breathe. "My mother died when I was 16, she offered. "Pneumonia. I spent years wondering if I could have done something different, called the doctor sooner, made her rest more. It took a long time to accept that some things are simply beyond our control." Augustus glanced at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her admission. "How did you make peace with it?" "I am not sure I have entirely," Morgan admitted. "But I learned that carrying guilt does not honor the person we lost. Living well, finding purpose, being kind to others in their memory, that honors them." They rode in companionable silence for a while after that, each lost in their own thoughts. The landscape around them was breathtaking in its vastness, rolling grasslands punctuated by distant mountains. Morgan had never seen so much open space, had never felt quite so small and simultaneously so free. The Shadow Creek Ranch appeared as they crested a hill, a collection of buildings arranged around a central yard. The main house was a sturdy two-story structure with a wraparound porch, weathered but solid. Beyond it stood a large barn, several corrals, and what looked like a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. A creek, presumably the one that gave the ranch its name, wound through the property, lined with cottonwood trees beginning to turn gold with autumn. "It is beautiful," Morgan said, and she meant it. Augustus looked at his land as if seeing it through her eyes, and some of the shame he felt about letting things go eased slightly. "It has good bones, just needs some attention." 3 men emerged from the barn as they pulled into the yard. Augustus introduced them as Jake, Pete, and Samuel, ranch hands who had stuck with him through the worst of his grief. They regarded Morgan with curious but respectful nods. "This is Morgan Kelly," Augustus said. "She is going to be helping with the horses, particularly Shadow. She has a gift." Jake, a man in his 40s with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes, raised his eyebrows. "Shadow let her near him. Not just near him. She was brushing him when I found her," Augustus confirmed. "I saw it with my own eyes, and I still barely believe it." The men exchanged glances that suggested they thought their boss might have finally lost his mind, but they were too polite to say so outright. Morgan appreciated their restraint. "Shadow should be arriving within the hour," Augustus continued. "Jake, can you make sure the back corral is ready? I want him somewhere quiet where he can settle in without a lot of activity around him." "Already done, boss," Jake replied. "Been keeping it clear like you asked." Augustus showed Morgan to the main house, carrying her bag despite her protests that she could manage it herself. Inside, the house bore all the signs of 2 young men living alone. The furniture was functional but sparse, the floors clean but dull from lack of polish, the curtains faded from sun exposure. It was clear no woman's hand had touched the space in a very long time, if ever. "I know it is not fancy," Augustus said, suddenly self-conscious. "Thomas and I were not much for decorating." "It is a home," Morgan said simply. "That is more than many people have." He led her upstairs to a bedroom that had clearly been prepared hastily that morning. The bed was made with fresh linens, and someone had opened the window to air out the space. "This was going to be a guest room, but we never got around to furnishing it properly. I brought in a bed and dresser from town this morning. If you need anything else, just let me know." Morgan set her bag on the bed and turned to face him. "Augustus, I need to be honest with you. I have never worked on a ranch before. I am going to make mistakes." "We all make mistakes," he replied. "What matters is that you are willing to try." She appreciated his faith in her more than she could express. "What do you need me to do first?" "First, we get you settled. Then we focus on Shadow. Everything else can wait." The sound of hoofbeats drew them both to the window. Morgan watched as Jake led Shadow into the yard, the stallion prancing nervously at the end of a long lead rope. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in the horse's body, the way his ears swiveled constantly, searching for threats. "I should go to him," Morgan said. They went down together, Augustus matching his stride to hers. When they reached the corral, Shadow was already inside, circling the perimeter with agitated steps. The moment Morgan appeared at the fence, though, his movement slowed. "Easy, boy," she called out. "I am here. Remember me." To everyone's astonishment, Shadow stopped his pacing and turned toward her voice. He did not approach, but he watched her with focused attention. "I will be damned," Pete muttered from where he stood near the barn. "He recognizes her." Morgan climbed carefully over the fence, ignoring Augustus's sharp intake of breath. She knew he wanted to tell her to be careful, to wait, but he held his tongue. She appreciated that too. She stood in the corral, making no move toward Shadow, simply being present. She began to speak to him, her voice carrying clearly across the space. "I know this is a new place, and new places are frightening, But this is your home. This is where you belong. Thomas would want you to be here to be cared for properly." The mention of Thomas's name made Shadow's ears prick forward sharply. Morgan noticed and continued. "He loved you very much. Augustus told me so. And Augustus loves you too, even though he has been too hurt to show it. We are all going to heal together, you and me and him, but you have to trust us." She began to move then, slow steps that covered only a few feet before she stopped again. Shadow watched her but did not retreat. Gradually, over the course of what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Morgan closed the distance between them until she stood close enough to touch him. "There you are," she whispered, extending her hand slowly. Shadow sniffed her palm, then allowed her to stroke his nose. "That is my brave boy." From his position outside the corral, Augustus watched with his heart in his throat. He had not realized how much he needed this, needed to know that Shadow could come back from the dark place grief had taken him. If the horse could heal, maybe Augustus could too. Over the following days, a routine established itself. Morgan rose before dawn to work with Shadow, spending hours in patient communication until the horse began to trust not just her, but also his surroundings. Augustus joined her whenever he could, learning from her approach, rediscovering the connection he thought he had lost forever. Between the work with Shadow, Morgan threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life. She helped mend fences, learned to cook for a household of working men, studied the patterns of the cattle and the land. The ranch hands warmed to her quickly, appreciating her willingness to work hard and her complete lack of pretension. But it was with Augustus that the most significant changes occurred. Working side by side with Shadow became a space where they could talk about things that mattered, where the walls both of them had built began to crumble. Augustus shared stories about Thomas, memories that hurt but also healed in the telling. Morgan eventually told him about St. Louis, about her stepfather's cruelty and her narrow escape from a life that would have destroyed her spirit. "I am glad you ran," Augustus said one evening as they stood watching Shadow graze peacefully in the corral. October had arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the vivid colors of autumn. "I know that probably makes me selfish, because if you had not run, you would not be here. But I am glad you are here." Morgan felt warmth bloom in her chest at his words. Over the past month, she had become increasingly aware of Augustus as more than just a man she was helping or working alongside. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, rare as those smiles were. She appreciated his quiet strength, the way he treated her as an equal even when she made mistakes. She had begun to care for him in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. "I am glad I am here too," she said softly. Augustus turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Morgan, I need to tell you something." "All right," she managed, her heart suddenly racing. "When I found you with Shadow that day, I thought you were just some foolish woman who did not understand the danger she was in, but you proved me wrong in every possible way." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "You brought light back into this place, not just for Shadow, but for me. I had given up on feeling anything but grief and guilt. Then you showed up and reminded me that life continues, that joy is still possible." "Augustus," Morgan breathed his name. "I am not saying this to make you uncomfortable," he continued. "I know you came here to escape, to start fresh. I do not want to be another man pushing you into something you do not want, but I need you to know that what I feel for you has become more than gratitude, much more." Morgan reached out and took his hand, the gesture feeling both bold and completely natural. "What if I want you to push a little?" His eyes widened slightly. "Morgan, I came here looking for freedom," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion coursing through her. I came here to escape a man who saw me as property, who wanted to own me rather than love me. But what I found was something I did not even know I was missing. I found purpose and belonging in you. I found you, Augustus." He stepped closer, his free hand rising to cup her cheek with a tenderness that made tears prick her eyes. "I have not courted anyone since before Thomas died. I do not know if I remember how to do this right." "I have never been courted by anyone worth courting," Morgan replied. "So perhaps we can figure it out together." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Augustus pulled her close, and Morgan wrapped her arms around him, feeling safe in a way she had never felt with any man. When they finally parted, both of them were smiling. "I need to do this properly," Augustus said, reluctance clear in his voice as he stepped back slightly. "You are staying in my home, working for me. People will talk if we are not careful about appearances." "Let them talk," Morgan said with more bravery than she felt. "No," Augustus insisted, though his hand still held hers. "Your reputation matters, especially in a town like Riverton. If we are going to do this, we are going to do it right. I want to court you properly, with everyone knowing my intentions are honorable." Morgan appreciated his respect even as part of her wanted to throw caution away entirely. "What do you suggest?" "I think you should move back to the boarding house in town," Augustus said, the words clearly paining him. "I will court you openly. We will attend church together, take walks, let everyone see that I am serious about you. Then, when enough time has passed and no one can question my intentions, I will ask you to marry me properly." "You want to marry me?" Morgan's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I want to marry you," Augustus confirmed, "if you will have me. But I want to do it in a way that honors you, that shows everyone you are not just some woman I took advantage of. You deserve that respect." Morgan knew he was right. Even though the thought of leaving the ranch, of being separated from him and Shadow, felt like tearing away a piece of herself. "How long do you think we should wait?" "A few months at least," Augustus said. "Long enough that no one can claim I acted improperly. I know it will be hard. It is going to be hard for me too." They agreed that Morgan would stay at the ranch through the end of October to finish Shadow's rehabilitation, then move back to town. It would give them 6 weeks to prepare for the separation, and to make sure Shadow was truly stable. Those 6 weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Augustus was careful never to compromise Morgan's reputation, but they found countless small ways to be together. They rode out to check the fence line side by side, their horses moving in tandem across the grassland. They sat on the porch in the evenings, talking until the stars filled the sky. They worked with Shadow, who had transformed from a traumatized, angry horse into one that was beginning to trust again. The change in Shadow seemed to mirror the change in Augustus himself. The weight of grief still rested on him, but it no longer crushed him. He smiled more often, laughed occasionally, engaged with his ranch hands in ways he had not since Thomas died. Everyone on the ranch noticed the difference, and they credited Morgan for the transformation. On Morgan's last day at the ranch before moving back to town, Augustus took her to a spot on the property she had not yet seen. They rode for nearly an hour, Shadow finally strong enough to be ridden again, carrying Augustus with the trust they had rebuilt together. Morgan rode a gentle mare named Daisy. They stopped on a hillside overlooking the ranch, the Wind River visible in the distance like a silver ribbon. "Thomas and I used to come here when we needed to think," Augustus said. "We would talk about our plans, dream about the future. The day before the accident, we were up here discussing whether to expand the herd or invest in better breeding stock." "It is peaceful," Morgan observed, understanding why they had chosen this spot. "I have not been back here since he died," Augustus admitted. "I could not face it alone." but I wanted to share it with you." Morgan dismounted and stood beside Shadow, running her hand along his neck. The horse had filled out over the past weeks, his coat now gleaming with health, his eyes bright and alert. "He would be proud of you," she said. "Thomas, I mean. He would be proud of how you fought through your grief, how you did not give up on Shadow or yourself." "I would have given up if not for you," Augustus said, dismounting as well. He stood close to her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body in the cool November air. "You saved us both." "No," Morgan corrected gently. "I just helped you remember how to save yourselves." Augustus pulled her into his arms, and they stood there on the hilltop, holding each other while the horses grazed peacefully nearby. "These next few months are going to be torture," he murmured against her hair. "Then we will make sure they pass quickly," Morgan said. "You will call on me regularly. We will attend every social function Riverton has to offer. We will be so sickeningly proper that no one will have any reason to gossip." He laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "When did you become such a planner?" "When I fell in love with a man who cares about doing things right," she replied without thinking, then froze as she realized what she had said. Augustus pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes searching hers. "Say that again." Morgan felt her cheeks heat but held his gaze. "I fell in love with you, Augustus Dalton. Somewhere between that first day in the stable and right now, I fell completely in love with you." The smile that spread across his face was radiant. "I love you too, Morgan Kelly. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you see the best in broken things. I love how you made me believe in second chances." They sealed the declaration with a kiss that was less gentle than the first, full of passion and promise, and the ache of knowing they would soon be apart. When they finally broke away, both were breathless. "We should head back," Augustus said reluctantly, "before I forget all my noble intentions about propriety." The ride down the hill was bittersweet, full of an awareness that their time living under the same roof was ending. That night, the ranch hands organized a small gathering to wish Morgan well, presenting her with a beautiful bridle they had all chipped in to buy. She cried when they gave it to her, touched by their acceptance and kindness. The next morning, Augustus drove her back to Riverton, her single bag somehow feeling heavier than it had when she first arrived. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house, welcomed her back with knowing eyes and a small smile. Word had clearly spread about the cowboy who had been spending time with the mysterious woman from St. Louis. True to his word, Augustus began courting Morgan in the most visible way possible. He appeared at the boarding house every Sunday morning to escort her to church, where they sat together in the pew he had once shared with Thomas. The congregation noticed, whispered, but found nothing to criticize in Augustus's respectful behavior. He took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, where they sat across from each other and talked for hours about everything and nothing. He invited her to the ranch for Sunday dinners with him and the hands, always making sure she returned to town before dark, always the perfect gentleman. Morgan, for her part, had found work at the general store where she helped with inventory and served customers. The wages were modest, but they allowed her to pay her own way, to maintain her independence. The store owner, Mrs. Patterson, was a widow in her 50s who took a liking to Morgan and often shared stories about her own late husband, reinforcing Morgan's belief that love was worth any risk. November gave way to December, and with it came the first significant snowfall. Riverton transformed into a winter wonderland, and Augustus seized the opportunity to take Morgan on a sleigh ride through the countryside. They bundled up in furs and blankets, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air as the horse pulled them along snow-covered roads. "I have been thinking," Augustus said as they glided past frost-covered fields. About timing. What kind of timing? Morgan asked, though her heart already suspected. I said we should wait a few months before I asked you properly, but it has been almost 2 months now. Christmas is coming. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I do not want to spend another year without you by my side. I have already lost too much time to grief and fear. Morgan turned to look at him, her green eyes bright with hope and something deeper. What are you saying? Augustus pulled the sleigh to a stop on the side of the road, then climbed down and came around to her side. To her shock and delight, he knelt in the snow, pulling off his glove to reach into his coat pocket. I am saying that I do not want to wait any more, he said, producing a ring that caught the winter sunlight. It was simple but beautiful, a single diamond set in gold. This was my mother's ring. Thomas and I both carried our parents' wedding rings with us when we came west, thinking one day we might need them. I never thought I would find someone worthy of wearing it, but then you appeared in that stable, brushing my horse like an angel sent to save us both. Tears were already streaming down Morgan's face, freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. Augustus. Morgan Kelly, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and the reason I keep believing that good things are still possible in this world? Yes, she said, the word coming out as a sob. Yes, of course yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then rose to pull her into his arms, lifting her right out of the sleigh and spinning her around in the snow. Their laughter echoed across the empty fields, pure and joyful and free. The wedding was planned for Christmas Eve, giving them just 3 weeks to prepare. It would be a simple affair at the church in Riverton, but neither of them wanted anything elaborate. What mattered was the commitment, the promise to build a life together. Mrs. Patterson helped Morgan find a suitable dress, a cream-colored gown with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It was not the elaborate wedding dress Morgan's mother had once described from her own wedding, but it was perfect for a winter ceremony in a small Wyoming town. Augustus spent those 3 weeks preparing the ranch house, working alongside his hands to make repairs he had neglected, to transform the space into something that could be a proper home for the woman he loved. He painted walls, mended furniture, even hung curtains he purchased from the general store after Morgan mentioned they would help keep the winter cold out. Jake and the other hands watched their boss with approval, glad to see him investing in the future rather than dwelling in the past. They liked Morgan, respected how hard she worked and how much she clearly loved Augustus. Several of them had lost loved ones themselves and understood the healing that could come from finding someone new to cherish. Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. The church had been decorated with pine boughs and candles, filling the space with the scent of evergreen and warm wax. Nearly the entire town turned out for the ceremony, curious about the union and charmed by the romance of it all. Morgan walked down the aisle alone, having no family to give her away, but she did not feel alone. She felt the support of Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Henderson, of the ranch hands who had become her friends, of the townspeople who had welcomed her despite her mysterious arrival. Most of all, she felt the love radiating from Augustus, who stood at the altar watching her approach with such profound emotion on his face that several women in the congregation had to dab at their eyes. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. They spoke traditional vows, their voices steady and sure. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Augustus kissed her with enough passion that a few people coughed awkwardly, but most just smiled. This was clearly a marriage built on genuine love, not convenience or necessity. The reception was held at the hotel, where the community had come together to provide food and music. There was dancing and laughter, and for the first time since Thomas's death, Augustus felt fully present in a moment of celebration. Morgan glowed beside him, her hand never leaving his, her smile bright enough to rival the Christmas candles. As the evening wound down, they said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon for the ride back to the ranch. Augustus had dismissed the hands for the night, giving them Christmas to spend in town or as they wished, wanting privacy for his first night with his bride. The ranch house was warm when they arrived, a fire already lit in the hearth from Augustus's earlier preparations. He carried Morgan over the threshold despite her laughing protests that she was perfectly capable of walking. "Indulge me," he said, setting her down gently in the middle of the parlor. "I have been waiting weeks to have you home where you belong." "Home," Morgan repeated, testing the word. "I like the sound of that." They stood in front of the fire, and Augustus slowly removed the pins from Morgan's hair, letting it fall in waves around her shoulders. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he murmured. "You are biased," she teased, but her breath caught as he traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. "Perhaps," he agreed, "but that does not make it less true." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that felt both new and somehow familiar, as if their souls had been waiting for this connection. Augustus was gentle with Morgan, aware of her inexperience, taking time to make sure she felt cherished and safe. Morgan, in turn, showed him that vulnerability was not weakness, that letting someone truly know you was the bravest thing of all. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Augustus's bed, now their bed, and talked about the future. They discussed the ranch and their dreams for expanding it, about the children they hoped to have someday, about growing old together in this place they were building together. "You ever regret it?" Augustus asked as Morgan's head rested on his chest. "Leaving St. Louis, coming here, choosing this life?" "Not for a single moment," Morgan replied. "Everything I endured, every hard choice I made led me to that stable where I found Shadow, where I found you." "I used to think Thomas's death had destroyed my future," Augustus confessed. "But maybe it just cleared the path for a different future. One I could not have imagined, but that is somehow better than anything I had planned." "Thomas would be happy for you," Morgan said with certainty. "For both of us." "I think he would have loved you," Augustus agreed. "You have his kindness, his ability to see the best in others." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, at peace in a way neither had been in far too long. The winter passed in a blur of hard work and deep contentment. Morgan threw herself into learning all aspects of ranch management, discovering she had a particular talent for the financial side of things. She organized Augustus's chaotic record keeping, found ways to reduce expenses without sacrificing quality, and even negotiated better prices with the suppliers in town. Augustus watched his wife with growing admiration and love. She had not just brought light back into his life, she had brought competence and partnership. They made decisions together, argued occasionally about the best approach to various challenges, and always found their way back to understanding and compromise. Shadow flourished under their joint care, becoming one of the finest horses in the region. Word spread about the stallion who had been saved from grief by a woman with a gentle hand, and people began bringing their troubled horses to the ranch, asking Morgan to work her magic. She discovered she had a gift for healing animals that had been traumatized or mistreated, and soon the Shadow Creek Ranch was known as much for its horse rehabilitation as for its cattle. By the time spring arrived, melting the snow and painting the grasslands green, Morgan knew she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited to tell Augustus until she was certain. She chose a morning in late April when they were working together in the barn, checking on a mare that was about to foal. "Augustus," she said as they stood watching the heavily pregnant horse shift restlessly in her stall. "I need to tell you something." He looked at her immediately, attuned to the serious note in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right," Morgan said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." The expression that crossed Augustus's face moved through shock, disbelief, and finally landed on pure joy. "Truly." "Truly," Morgan confirmed. "Probably sometime in late October, if I have calculated correctly." Augustus let out a whoop of excitement that startled the mare and probably could be heard all the way in town. He picked Morgan up and spun her around, then immediately set her down, his face creasing with concern. "I should not have done that. Are you hurt? Do you need to sit down?" Morgan laughed at his sudden panic. "I am pregnant, not made of glass." "But perhaps we could celebrate in ways that do not involve quite so much spinning." He kissed her instead, pouring all his happiness and hope into it. When they broke apart, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Thomas would have loved being an uncle." "I know," Morgan said gently. "But he will still be part of our family, part of our story. We will make sure our children know about him, about his kindness and his dreams." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Morgan continued to work longer than Augustus would have preferred. She finally agreed to reduce her physical labor when the summer heat became oppressive, spending more time on the financial work and the gentler aspects of horse training. They prepared a nursery in the room next to their own bedroom, painting it a soft yellow that would work for either a boy or a girl. Mrs. Patterson organized a social gathering where the women of Riverton brought gifts and advice, welcoming Morgan fully into the community. Augustus became almost comically protective as Morgan's belly grew round. He would not let her ride horses, insisted she rest frequently, and fussed over her diet until she finally had to tell him firmly that the baby would be fine, even if she occasionally wanted pickles for breakfast. The ranch hands found their boss's anxiety amusing, but also touching. They pitched in to take over the heavier work, making sure Morgan was not overtaxed. Jake, in particular, became something of a guardian, often appearing at her elbow with a chair or a glass of water before she even realized she needed it. October arrived with cool temperatures, and the vivid colors of autumn once again painting the landscape. Morgan's time drew near, and Augustus arranged for the doctor from Riverton to make the journey to the ranch when the labor began, not wanting to risk the trip to town. The labor started on a Tuesday evening, gentle contractions that gradually grew stronger through the night. Augustus stayed by Morgan's side every moment, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even as he privately panicked that something would go wrong. The doctor arrived near dawn, a competent woman named Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had moved to Riverton the previous year. She examined Morgan and declared everything was progressing normally, much to Augustus's relief. By mid-morning, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the ranch house. Augustus held his wife as she cradled their newborn, both of them crying tears of joy and wonder. "He is perfect," Morgan breathed, examining tiny fingers and toes. "He looks like you," Augustus said, noting the baby's reddish tint to his hair. "He has your nose," Morgan countered, laughing through her tears. They had discussed names for months, going back and forth on various options. But in this moment, looking at their son, they both knew what felt right. "Thomas," Augustus said softly. "Thomas Kelly Dalton." Morgan looked at her husband, seeing the mixture of grief and joy in his face, understanding what this meant to him. "Thomas," she agreed. "So your brother's memory lives on." Baby Thomas proved to be a healthy, happy child who seemed to embody the best of both his parents. He had Morgan's curiosity and Augustus's determination, and from an early age he showed a remarkable affinity for animals. The first few months of parenthood were exhausting but wonderful. Augustus proved to be a devoted father, taking on night feedings without complaint, walking the floor with his son for hours when the baby was fussy. Morgan watched him with their child and fell even more deeply in love, seeing the gentleness he had hidden for so long finally given full expression. By the time little Thomas was a year old, Morgan was pregnant again. Their daughter, Amelia Rose, arrived on a spring morning in 1885, smaller than her brother but equally fierce in her determination to be heard. She had Augustus's gray eyes and Morgan's delicate features, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the first moment he held her. The ranch continued to thrive as their family grew. Augustus and Morgan worked as true partners, dividing responsibilities based on their strengths and supporting each other through challenges. The horse rehabilitation program Morgan had started became renowned throughout Wyoming, bringing in additional income and a steady stream of people seeking help for their troubled animals. Jake eventually married a widow from town, bringing her and her 2 children to live in a small house Augustus and Morgan built on the ranch property. Pete retired a few years later, passing away peacefully in his sleep, and Samuel moved on to start his own small ranch with money he had saved over the years. New hands came to work at Shadow Creek, drawn by the ranch's reputation for fair treatment and the sense of family that permeated everything they did. Shadow lived to the impressive age of 26, spending his final years in comfortable retirement grazing in the fields he had once been too traumatized to enjoy. When he finally passed away in 1894, the whole family mourned him. Young Thomas, by then 12 years old, helped his father bury the horse on the hillside where Augustus had once brought Morgan, marking the grave with a simple stone that read Shadow, survivor, teacher, friend. Morgan and Augustus went on to have 4 children in total. After Thomas and Amelia came twin boys, Marcus and Matthew, born in 1887. The house was always full of noise and laughter, the chaos of family life that neither Morgan nor Augustus had experienced in their own childhoods. They made sure their children knew the story of how they met, of Shadow and the stable and the second chances that love could bring. They taught their children about Thomas, Augustus's brother, showing them the grave marker on the hill and sharing stories of his kindness and optimism. In this way, Thomas's memory became a living part of the family he never got to meet, but whose loss had inadvertently brought them all together. As the years passed, Riverton grew from a small frontier town into a more established community. The railroad came through in 1890, bringing new opportunities and connections to the wider world. Augustus and Morgan adapted with the times, finding ways to modernize their operation while maintaining the personal touch that had always defined Shadow Creek Ranch. Morgan never lost her gift for working with traumatized horses, and she passed this skill on to her children, particularly to young Thomas, who seemed to have inherited his father's determination and his mother's empathy in equal measure. By his teenage years, Thomas was working alongside his mother, helping to rehabilitate horses that others had given up on. Amelia showed different talents, revealing a sharp business mind and a way with numbers that impressed even her mother. She took over much of the ranch's financial management while still in her teens, finding new markets for their cattle and negotiating contracts that significantly increased their profits. The twins, Marcus and Matthew, were inseparable and showed a talent for innovation. They were always tinkering with equipment, finding ways to make tasks more efficient, bringing new ideas from their extensive reading and correspondence with ranchers in other states. Augustus watched his children grow with a mixture of pride and wonder. He never forgot how close he had come to losing everything to grief, how one woman appearing in a stable had changed the entire trajectory of his life. He made sure Morgan knew, every single day, how grateful he was for her presence in his life. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Augustus took Morgan back to that hillside overlooking the ranch. They were both older now, marked by years of hard work and the joyful exhaustion of raising 4 children. But the love between them had only deepened, strengthened by shared challenges and triumphs. "You remember what I said to you up here?" Augustus asked as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You said Thomas would be proud of us," Morgan recalled. "That he would be proud of how we fought through the grief." "I was wrong," Augustus said, taking her hand. "It was not just about fighting through grief. It was about learning to live again, to love again, to believe that happiness was not just something in the past, but something we could still build." Morgan leaned against her husband, feeling the solid strength of him that had been her anchor for 2 decades. "You gave me a home when I was running from a life that would have destroyed me. You gave me a family, a purpose, a love I never imagined was possible. You saved me first," Augustus insisted. "You walked into that stable and reminded me that even the most broken things can heal if someone cares enough to be patient with them." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. The land they had built together spread out before them. The ranch that had once been the dream of 2 brothers had become something more, something lasting. It was a legacy of love and perseverance, of choosing to move forward even when the past tried to hold you back. When they finally rode back to the ranch house as darkness fell, they could see lights glowing in the windows, could hear the sounds of their children's voices calling to each other. This was what Augustus had needed to see all those years ago when grief threatened to consume him. That life continues, that new joy is possible, that love has the power to redeem even the darkest losses. Morgan had found a home in the most unexpected way, had discovered that sometimes running away from the wrong thing leads you directly to the right thing. The woman who had appeared in Riverton with nothing but a carpet bag and determination had become the heart of a family, the soul of a ranch, the love of a good man's life. As they entered the house to the chaos of dinner preparations and children arguing about whose turn it was to set the table, Augustus pulled Morgan aside for a quick kiss. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" she asked, though she smiled, knowing. "For seeing Shadow when everyone else looked away. For seeing me when I was lost. For every day since." "That," Morgan said, rising on her toes to kiss him again, "is what love does. It sees what others miss. It stays when others leave. It believes in second chances and new beginnings." The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and new challenges, and the satisfaction of watching everything they had built continue to grow and prosper. Augustus and Morgan grew old together on the ranch they loved, surrounded by family, and the animals that had always been central to their story. On quiet evenings, they would sometimes walk out to the hillside where Shadow lay buried beside the grave they eventually placed for Augustus's brother, finally bringing Thomas home to the land he had loved. They would stand there together, hand in hand, and remember all the twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. Morgan never regretted her flight from St. Louis, never looked back with longing at the life she had rejected. How could she, when what she had found in a dusty stable in Riverton, Wyoming, had been so much more than she ever dared to dream? And Augustus, who had once thought his capacity for happiness had died with his brother, learned that the heart has infinite room for love if we are brave enough to let it heal and grow again. The neglected horse that once seemed beyond saving had taught them both that lesson, had brought them together in a moment that changed everything. Their love story became part of the local history, a tale told by their children and grandchildren, the story of how a young woman with nothing but courage found a grieving man and his traumatized horse, and how patience and compassion had transformed all their lives. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes come from the smallest acts of kindness, that noticing what others overlook can lead to miracles. When Augustus Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78 in the year 1915, he died knowing he had lived a life fuller and richer than he ever imagined possible. Morgan was beside him, as she had been for nearly 33 years, holding his hand and reminding him of how much he was loved. She mourned him deeply, but did not let grief consume her the way Augustus once had. She knew he would not want that. Instead, she continued to live fully, working with her children and grandchildren to keep the ranch thriving, to maintain the legacy they had built together. Morgan Kelly Dalton lived to see the world change in ways she never could have predicted when she first stepped off the train in Riverton. She saw automobiles replace horses on the streets, saw the frontier become settled, saw Wyoming grant women the right to vote long before the rest of the nation followed. She witnessed both world wars and the transformation of the American West from wild frontier to modern civilization. Through it all, she remained the heart of Shadow Creek Ranch, the matriarch of a large and loving family. She told her grandchildren about their grandfather's bravery and kindness, about a horse named Shadow who had taught them all about healing, about taking a chance on love even when life seemed darkest. When she finally passed away in 1934 at the age of 74, surrounded by 3 generations of family, her last words were to her eldest son, who had been named for the uncle he never met. "Tell them," she whispered, "to always be kind to the broken things. You never know what beauty might emerge if you are patient enough to care." She was buried beside Augustus on the hillside they had loved, and the entire community of Riverton turned out to honor the woman who had become a legend in her own right. The woman who had arrived with nothing and given everything, who had seen possibility where others saw only problems, who had loved with a fullness that touched everyone she encountered. The Shadow Creek Ranch continued through the generations, each inheritor maintaining the traditions Morgan and Augustus had established. The horse rehabilitation program she started never ceased, becoming a cornerstone of the ranch's identity. And in the family records carefully maintained over the decades, the story was preserved of how it all began with a neglected horse, and a woman brave enough to reach out to him. On the weathered stone marking Morgan's grave, her children had chosen words that captured the essence of who she was. She saw the forgotten, healed the broken, and loved without measure. In her hands, even the wildest hearts found peace. And so the story that began in a dusty stable in 1882 became a legacy that stretched across decades, a testament to the transforming power of compassion and love. Morgan Kelly had run from a life that would have destroyed her spirit and had found instead a life that allowed her spirit to soar. She had discovered that home was not a place you started from, but a place you built with your own hands and heart. Augustus Dalton had learned that grief, while powerful, need not be permanent, that opening yourself to love again after loss was not a betrayal, but a tribute to those who had gone before. Together, they had proven that second chances were real, that healing was possible, and that sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the most extraordinary lives. Their descendants continued to tell the story, passing it down through the generations like a precious heirloom. And in that way, Morgan and Augustus lived on, not just in the blood and bones of their children's children, but in the reminder they left behind. That courage, compassion, and love can overcome even the darkest circumstances and build something beautiful from the ruins of loss. The Shadow Creek Ranch remained a place where broken things were made whole, where every horse that arrived traumatized or neglected received the patient care that Morgan had first shown to Shadow so many years ago. It remained a place where family was defined not just by blood, but by loyalty and love, where the values of hard work and kindness were passed down as carefully as property deeds and brand marks. And on quiet evenings, when the wind swept across the Wyoming grasslands and the sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, some said you could still feel the presence of those who had built this place. A determined woman with auburn hair, a grieving cowboy who learned to love again, and a black stallion who had brought them together. Their story had become part of the land itself, woven into every fence post and barn beam, whispered in the rustling of the cottonwood trees along Shadow Creek. It was a reminder that every life is a story worth telling, that every act of compassion ripples outward in ways we cannot predict, and that love, real love, never truly dies. It transforms, it multiplies, it becomes the foundation on which generations build their lives and dreams. And it all began with a simple act of kindness. A woman brushing a neglected horse, refusing to walk away from something broken, choosing instead to stay and heal and hope. From that single choice, an entire world of love and possibility had emerged, proving that sometimes the smallest gestures create the most profound changes, and that the most beautiful stories often begin in the most unexpected places.